So what we have today is a preset that's going after some of the sounds from Yes's 90125 album. I'm a big fan of Trevor Rabin and the sounds he gets in the studio. And I wanted to see if I could get some of the tones from that album, referencing some of the big songs, things like Owner of a Lonely Heart, The Solo on Hearts, those kind of tones. So I did some research and I put together this preset, and I think I've gotten pretty close. And so I wanted to walk through the preset. As always, this will be available in my Cortex Cloud account, so you can grab it for yourself. But what I've got today is I'm playing a Strassow guitar with a single coil in the bridge, but it's kind of a hot single coil and kind of a full sounding single coil. So that's kind of similar to the setup that he had, from my understanding, when he was recording the album. And so let's walk through what we got here. Let me bring up the gig view. So the core of the tone is I have dual Marshall 2203s running, and I'm using them for all the tones, whether it's the distorted or the cleans. And so you can see here I've got a lot of the settings hooked into scenes because these things are moving around as we go from scene to scene. And so I've got two of those running. As usual, when I'm running kind of parallel amps in stereo that are the same amp, I'm slightly tweaking the settings. You can see that as I'm doing that here. They're both running through this 4x12 Marshall cabinets. I'm using the same cabinet for both, but I am tweaking the mics for each. So this is something common that I do when I'm running parallel amps that are the same configuration. I'll slightly vary them on this left and right just to get a little bit more of a spread. And if we look at the mix, I'm not really panning them very hard. I'm only panning them 10 to left and right. So again, just a little bit of a spread to get somewhat of a width to the stereo effect. And then what I've got in the back end is an EQ. My understanding is that when Yes was recording this album, there was a lot of EQ done kind of at the console. So this I've got kind of on the back end of the preset, and I'm mimicking that kind of graphic EQ. And you can see here for the rhythm sounds, which is where we're going to start, which is kind of the pure Marshalls, the one thing we're doing is we're pushing the 2K, and that's something that I read that was done, and when I tried it out, it really, for me, worked and sounded like some of the rhythm sounds like for the opening of Owner of a Lonely Heart and that kind of thing. I'm also pulling back the 500K a little bit, so we're kind of pushing the upper mids and bringing back the lower mids. And so that sound, we've got this. So I think that's a good kind of thick crunch sound with the right frequencies for building upon. So what Trevor Rabin would do from there is he would boost that with a DS1 on the front. And you can see here, I'm not using a lot of distortion. I am rolling the tone back a little bit, but I'm pushing the levels here. And so that turns the tone into this. If you think about the beginning of Owner of a Lonely Heart, I think you would start out with this kind of thicker boosted sound. And then when it gets into it, when the full band's there, it kind of pulls back and you'd be. One thing I'll say, if you're listening to me going like, that's not the right riff, I know it's not the right riff of Owner of a Lonely Heart. I don't want to get into any kind of copyright issues, so I'm just kind of tweaking it a little bit, but you can kind of get the idea. From there, that same boosted sound with the DS1, we can use that to kind of turn into a lead tone. So we just push the distortion a little more and maybe roll a little more of the tone off. You can get a nice kind of bass for a lead tone. And then for the Owner of a Lonely Heart, what we're adding in is this pitch shifter. And what we're doing is we're shifting up a fifth, and the mix is pretty high. So basically, my understanding of how he recorded this is he had two Marshall stacks in side by side. One was getting the pitch shifted 100%, and one was the clean. And so I've kind of done that here. I did roll it back to 90% because I found the mix wasn't quite right. And I wanted to just add a little bit more of the dry sound to this second amp. But here's what this sounds like. think that's pretty close to kind of the lead tone from that Owner of a Lonely Heart solo. I like it. It's kind of fun. Another solo I love on the album is on the song Hearts. And it's a little bit of a different sound. And this one I had to kind of go by ear. And one of the things that occurred to me is I think the EQ on this shifted a little bit, where a lot of the tones in Owner of a Lonely Heart are pushing that 2K. To me, the Hearts lead is actually pushing a little bit lower. It's more kind of almost a tube screamer kind of EQ. And so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just giving a little bump up to that 1K and then down a little bit. And I'm also pushing the front end a little bit more in terms of more distortion and pushing a little more mids into the amps. And so it kind of sounds like this. Again, I think a little bit more mid-centric, a little bit more fullness at that 1K kind of sound. And I think it's closer to that kind of really kind of thick singing lead he's got on the Heart solo, which is one of my favorites from the album. And then lastly, I took a crack at creating the arpeggiated clean sound from Owner of a Lonely Heart. And so the first thing we did there is we're dropping down the gain on our Marshalls quite a bit. And we're adding in a lot more mids. You know, the distorted sounds were a little scooped. These are very mid-forward. I'm turning off the EQ. And then what I'm doing is I'm adding in, well, first, I'm adding a compressor up front with a lot of compression, a lot of mix. So again, it's a very kind of 80s clean with that kind of sparkle compressed sound. And then we've got a CE2 chorus. We've got a delay with only a single repeat, mix at 35, and the delay times at 250. And then for all these sounds, and I should have said this earlier, we're running through just a room reverb, mix at 35%, decay at 1.5. So not a lot of reverb, just a sound of kind of that you're in the studio room. And so this sounds like this. And I'm going to move to an in-between position. This is my bridge and middle pickups. So I think overall, a lot of these sounds get pretty close to kind of what he was doing there in the studio. Obviously, I mean, he's really good at getting great recorded guitar sounds. And so, you know, we're doing our best here in the Quad Cortex to mimic that. But I mean, Yes was always on the forefront of kind of digital recording and new recording techniques. And we're really good at not only getting great guitar sounds out of the guitar and the amp and pedals, but really knowing how to capture that in the studio, add studio effects, those kinds of things. So it's always challenging to go after a tone that's so kind of pristine as Trevor Rabin sounds, but I think we got pretty close. I think there's some good, fun stuff here to play around with, and I had a lot of fun kind of getting into it and trying to find this out. So like I said, this will be available on my Cortex Cloud account. Feel free to grab it, download it, play with it. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.